Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 175. I'm talking to Dave Crance, who is a very knowledgeable when it comes to American history. And we're going to talk about the history of his home state of Virginia, which has certainly played a huge part in the history of America. Being one of the original 13 colonies and home to, still the birthplace of more American presidents than any other state. So that's definitely something we can talk about here. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Chris?
Yeah. So how'd you get into libertarianism?
I fell into it actually back around 2010, 2011-ish.
Yeah.
Really got more involved in it locally in 2012. So for me, it spoke to me properly. So as a kid, I grew up on a large tobacco farm. At 18, I went in the military, did time as a paratrooper, saw 2 different combat tours, Central America and the first Gulf War with it. And when I came as a young man, when I first got out of the military, first we're just trying to survive with kids, life, and everything going on. We don't really get too engaged too often early on. But I just became extremely disappointed with the direction the government was going politically throughout the country, and started looking into different options with it. And when I found the Libertarian Party, started reading through it, and every single thing clicked with me. It was exactly the way I perceived how things should be. So like I said, that was around 2011, 2012, got involved with the local party. Now as a member, not heavily involved with it. And Virginia had some strong years there for the Libertarian Party. So at about the time which is probably why I discovered it, but about the time that I got involved with it, 2013 was the year that Sarvis ran for governor with it. So we had Robert Sarvis running for governor, and I still think he took the largest vote percentage. I think it was like 6 to 7%, 6.5% or something, of any third party in over 100 years in the state of Virginia. And then 2014, with the growth of the party, we actually had congressional candidates in all of our congressional districts. And it was the first time, again, that the state had seen a candidate for every congressional district. And I believe that had been probably just shy of 100 years, if I remember correctly on it. And I think I'm pretty close to that. So at that point, Virginia, libertarianism was really growing.
Yes.
And that's kind of what drew me into it. We were, and we pretty much still are, the fastest growing third party in the nation with it. And from there, as the kids got older, I've got a bunch of kids, but as the kids got older, things with work got more secure. I had more time. I started giving more interest to it. And then we had some issues here in Virginia, like a lot of the different affiliates did about 2 years ago. And that was one of those points where I decided, I got to step up and do more. And that's what led to the point of running the campaign last year here for the state delegate position in Fairfax. And that's what led to chairing LP Nova currently with it. It's just this feeling of we got to get back active, bring all of our people together and get this party growing in Virginia. So I have always been a local libertarian. We need the national level, but I'm one of those people that truly feels that our party is best represented at the local and state level. And that's because we have so many differences. We're all very unique in this party with it. And that's lately become, it should be our selling point. It should be our main selling point that we are the true big tent party. We've got the liberal side. We've got the conservative side. We've got everything, anarchy. You can imagine everything you could want. We have those voices. And at times, all those different voices, when they work together, and that's what I saw in Virginia back when I was younger, when all those voices are working together, we can really accomplish some great things. But the problem is too often we allow ourselves to get to fighting ourselves instead of working together towards a greater goal, which at the end of the day is reduce this government footprint on our backs.
Okay. So, I just wondered, you said Central America. Would that have been Panama or El Salvador?
Yes, I at the age of 18, like I said, the house I grew up on was a mile from the nearest paved highway. Like I
Yeah.
said, I grew up on a big tobacco farm. And I used to think as a child, one day I'm going out this road and I'm not coming back. My high school was like 18 miles away. It was a very rural area. And, this is the 80s. Things were not going well yet. They hadn't totally revved back up. So
Yes.
my parents were not going to be able to afford college at that point. So the option I had to look at is I was not the greatest student. I will say that. So the option was get the GI Bill. So I went and saw a recruiter. I'm really looking for the college funds with it. And I was a very young, naive 18-year-old coming off a tobacco farm. But I did very well on the testing and stuff, had a lot of options, but he convinced me that I should go airborne because that would give me the most money for my bonus for enlisting. And with airborne at the time, it required a 4-year enlistment to go infantry and airborne. But this is 1988, Chris. We hadn't been to war in my lifetime. There was Grenada, but there wasn't a lot of conflict. When I went into 1988, if somebody had told me, Dave Crance, you're going to be in any combat, I would have laughed at him. I honestly, as an 18-year-old, I would have laughed at that. It was beyond my imagination. Needless to say, yes, I ended up in Panama. I think I also, not knowing the structure of things, when you first enlist, they give you your dream sheet where you can fill out where you hope to go with stations. I think, being older, I know that's more of a recruitment process than anything. It isn't going to happen. But on my dream sheet, I saw Caribbean tour. And that's the way they worded it, Caribbean tour. So I looked at that as an 18-year-old kid, and I'm thinking, Caribbean tour, that must mean Puerto Rico. If you get this one, you're going to go to Puerto Rico. And then they had the CONUS tours, continental United States. And I saw Southeast U.S. So I'm thinking, okay, Southeast U.S., that's close to Maryland. I'll be able to get home on the weekends. When I do have to go overseas, I'll go to Puerto Rico and on the Caribbean tour. I really pictured it like doing guard duty on beaches, I'm sure at some point in the process, there's that guy, 4-year enlistment, infantry, airborne. He wants to go to Central America. The people that knew probably looked at it completely wrong.
Yes.
And that is how I found myself at the age of 18 stationed down in Panama. What a lot of people, and I know we're gonna move into the segue into Virginia later, what a lot of people don't realize, because this was, even CNN was new in Panama, and it wasn't on long. This is, again, 88, 89. Panama happened before the media explosion and well before the internet explosion or the internet even existing with it.
So the internet was on some colleges. That's about it. Yeah.
So it's 1988. I'm in Panama. I'm sort of shell-shocked to go into this unit. So at that point, we had one airborne battalion in Panama stationed there at the canal, 508th Infantry Airborne. It was only 3 companies and an HHC company. And the job when I first got there in 88 was, for an infantryman, it was the coolest job in the world. You were just practicing to be a reactionary force throughout Central and South America. So a lot of times you would do jumps into different countries and basically just do an airborne operation for training. And then they would move in the engineers afterwards, build a school, build a medical facility. It was just standard training where you got to see large parts of that part of the world. And, it was 5 to 10 days out, and then you had 4 days off, and you're in paradise. And the country was paradise. I've never loved a country more than I loved Panama at that point. And this kind of segues into where we're at these days.
Yeah. I know a lot of Americans who live in Panama, and they love it.
The people are wonderful. So I am in this paradise for an 18-year-old. And that's the only way I can refer to it. At the time, we were already kind of trying to tighten down on Noriega before all this. So the economy, we had really crushed it down. So it's about one of the few places where a private to a PFC can actually live like a king on the weekends. You could go anywhere you want and do anything you wanted when you were off. So I'm enjoying the tour, but what happened down there that a lot of people are not realizing is they did have the elections where the U.S. was influencing for its own good.
Yeah.
But during those elections in May of '89, we had the riots. We were suddenly out in riot gear, protecting the hospitals, the facilities, everything along the canal with it. And it just escalated. It ratcheted. I watched this perfect paradise delve completely into nothing but constant riots and issues going on. We were always reacting to the city. I want to say that I feel like from July forward, we were just doing operations to what I call show of force, where you're just making movements through the city, making movements to bases so they can see the American presence, and at the same time dealing with anti-American riots at all of our facilities with it.
Yeah.
And, it just spiraled in less than maybe 8-9 months. It spiraled from an election and those first riots to full-blown combat.
Yeah.
The unit I was with the battalion I was with did handle most of Panama City, including what was the commandancia, because it sounds like you know a little bit about Panama. My particular
I know my geography, yeah, but and I've looked into Panama because I've certainly thought about leaving, and just because like I said, you hear all these nice things about it.
It is a beautiful country now, but that city was devastated during that conflict. The unit I was with, we lost 2 guys that first night and had over 20 people wounded. It was a tough fight for as small an action as it was. And I put that in perspective. I survived that, and in April of '90 get reassigned to Fort Bragg. And then I ended up doing the entire first Gulf War from August. I was one of the first people to set my foot into Saudi Arabia from August all the way through the next year into Iraq. And Panama was tougher, but the later war overshadowed everything down there. And I think that's why it's becoming more of a forgotten thing in history with it. It's just sort of a little bleep on the radar with it. People don't realize what happened because we didn't have the media attention the Gulf War generated.
Yeah, well, in between, something else huge happened, and that was, of course, the crumbling of the Berlin Wall. But yes,
exactly.
I don't know if you ever thought much about, am I going to have to go fight the Ruskies? Although you were a teenager. I remember the guys who were going into the military when I was in high school. Most of those guys were completely apolitical. They didn't think about politics.
We weren't going in to fight. We were not going in because of a belief in anything. It's funny you said that, because in basic and AIT down at Fort Benning, they would show us the films and talk to us about the Spetsnaz and the Russians and this great threat when I was going through training. You would look at this stuff, and I always expected one day, I guess I'm going to have to fight Russians now. Yeah. I never met a Russian my entire life, except for civilians. It's just interesting how that fell to end up on, every single continent except for Australia and Antarctica in those course of those 4 years, but just never ended up anything to do with Russia on it. And, on that point, because there may be viewers here who enlisted post 9/11, I haven't mentioned to you, I'm chaplain over at my VFW post. I really believe I've been with that post for over a decade. I really believe in giving back to our younger veterans coming home, giving the time, making sure they know. Media, internet's been phenomenal for that. Because when I got back in '92, 4 years later, it's like 4 years of the world disappeared because we didn't have communication back then. You didn't know what was going on in the States. If you did see a movie, it was a movie that was shown in the States a year and a half ago. And then on top of it, you're 22 years old, you're dropped back out there, you're trying to go to community college, and you cannot relate to anybody anymore. It's an extreme challenge. And, on top of that, you don't even realize what's going on until you get a little bit older. Luckily, later, I was able to figure out what was going on with it and kind of get control myself. But because of that, not having that contact, I work very hard. I'm also a member of our American Legion. I'm on the Greater Falls Church Veterans Council. I work very hard to make sure that all of our veterans feel needed and get redirection with it. That they have some place to go and that they can feel involved with it. because I think that's one of the things that we have. We can all talk patriotic, but we don't really think about it outside of a few chants and maybe Facebook emoji or something. But going back to what I said about 88, no concept of any chance of combat. I look at these young people who enlisted after 9/11. They knew what they were going in for. That's a whole different crop. If somebody was to say to me, Dave Crance, they just attacked New York, we're going to war, people are already dying, will you enlist? I don't know the answer to that, Chris, because I wanted my GI Bill. I have such a huge respect for today's veterans over just any veteran, any person who was enlisted post 9/11, they know what they're signing up for. At least in my case, it was kind of like just shock left and right, but they know what they're going in. So if there's anybody listening to your podcast that falls into that category, I salute you. I really do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So those were longer answers than I expected, but anyway, so
feel free to shut me up. That's an important thing to do.
Virginia, was first, settled in 1620 at Jamestown. And, I've been to Williamsburg, and Williamsburg was the first capital. And of course, people slowly moved back, and Virginia became very much a tobacco economy at the time. And, unfortunately, this was also the place really where slavery in America got its foothold, although slavery was a very old institution at the time. This was where, and at the time also, Virginia was, for a long time, I believe, the most populous colony.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. And certainly it was and of course, Virginia was also claimed more land than it has today. At times it claimed Kentucky. It also tried to claim
all the way to the Mississippi. Correct.
What was the Northern Hemisphere? I know there's, it's interesting because when Kentucky was separated, and then West Virginia separated, there's some county. I believe, for example, like maybe Jefferson County and Mason County, but I'm not sure. But Virginia has lost those counties twice.
That sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right. I've been to Jefferson. I think you're correct on that. I remember reading that out there.
And of course, you realize, you look at a map, you realize, all these counties in West Virginia, all these counties in Virginia, there's no county name in both states, right. And there really aren't that many common city names either. I know there are 2 Petersburgs, but outside of that, there's not a lot of duplication there. So yeah, so you and of course Virginia's. You had mentioned though, that one thing that made me interested was you had mentioned, Virginia's history in the Civil War. And of course, let's go back to maybe, Virginia. Was Virginia probably have the highest population of slaves at the time, would you say, or not?
I don't know the answer, but I would suspect it was likely because of the size of the population in general. But I do not know that answer for sure.
Yeah. And of course, one thing that's forgotten, those Western settlements were going, Eastern Virginia has a lot of flat places. It's very suited toward the plantation economy. Me being from West Virginia, which is hills everywhere, you're lucky if you can find a square quarter mile of flat land there anywhere. It's not suited to the plantation economy. It became a state of small farmers who just went west and I don't know, probably squatted in some cases, but just settled the land and were just small.
Well, they were literally squatting out there. That's how most of the part what we now call West Virginia was.
Yeah, and there was always talk, and there had been talk for a long time, I guess, about splitting the two. Largely because it was just hard to traverse over the mountains to go to Richmond to lobby for whatever, so that led up to. But we're going up into the Civil War though. And of course we had the John Brown incident at Harper's Ferry, which of course Robert E. Lee was the one who put that down. I believe he was a colonel at the time.
Well, exactly. I mean, part of our conversation got started on, and the shame of it is, and I guess the reason I pipe up when I see, whether it be on social media or in conversations, where and also, I have become more of a military buff over the years a little bit, having served. But when I see these officers, these generals, these leaders, and the people of Virginia from that time, I mean, they were people of their time. And you see it being put down constantly. At one point you look at it and you're like, I love Virginia. I do love Virginia with all my heart. Like I said, my entire father's side is here, moved to the south side, actually. But once you start looking into it, the message that's sent out there really isn't true about Virginia as a whole. It gets applied because of the Civil War with it. And what you said, you had the mountainous regions. We got the plains down here towards the areas where you have more of the plantations. But even Northern Virginia, back at that time, was already moving towards more of what it's become today. Northern Virginia was more, I don't want to use the term aristocratic in a negative sense, but it was becoming more of an urban area at that point. So, when I started looking into it, I was shocked that Virginia had 2 conventions, not 1. That was the first thing that surprised me because, I'd grown up thinking Virginia was part of the South, and Virginia was like, we're going to fight over this. We're going to deal with it. And when I really started, and I like to speak really clearly in lay terms. When I looked at it and realized they actually voted at their first convention to not succeed.
Yeah.
They wanted to stay part of the Union, and the Unionists outnumbered them by 2/3 in that first vote. And I think what you hit on hit it. I'd have to pull it up to look again, but one day I went in and looked, and the vote fell exactly what we're talking about. A lot, and this is where it gets a little interesting to me. The Northern Virginia side and what became West Virginia, Shenandoah, all the way down, is where the votes were to stay. It was actually 1/3, that southeastern area, that wanted to leave over slavery, and they got voted down with it.
Yeah.
And, at the end.
Yeah, let's. I want to put a little more context here. So,
okay, go ahead.
So first of all, in 1860, there's the Democratic Party split. So you have Douglas is the nominee of the Northern Democrats. John Breckinridge is the nominee of the Southern Democrats. I believe he was Virginian, right? Breckinridge.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
But this was, and we were already getting into the point where there was a much more of a population imbalance. There really wasn't any, one of the reasons why, for secession is because they were a minority that could just be outvoted. It was, no, he was from Kentucky. Okay. I believe you. Douglas is the nominee, and then you have the Southern Democrats. And then of course, then they nominated, there was this Constitutional Union Party, and John Bell actually won Virginia in the 1860 election.
So John Bell with that party did win. And you were talking about choosing the people. I think another thing that people, which is really fascinating to me, and I'm going to use that 2/3, 1/3. I believe it was like 20 for the Republican convention that year, the one that chose Lincoln. They were expecting a guy by the name of Seward within the Republican Party to pull.
Yeah, William Seward, yes.
Yeah, and they thought that's what Virginia
later became
wholeheartedly behind.
Yeah.
But 2/3 of the Virginia delegates, like 14 of the 23, and I'm not exact numbers, I'm not looking at anything, but they went for Lincoln. And Virginia was actually, the Virginia GOP was actually not GOP, Republican Party back then, was part of what got Lincoln nominated.
Yeah.
Which to me is kind of fascinating because of the way it went later, but it also kind of makes sense with the back and forth between Richmond, the governor, Lincoln, and, between the two conventions of secession, it makes sense why they would have sent delegations to Lincoln to try and get ways out, because they were supporting him to that part. And I'm assuming, again, probably the northern side and the western side from the way the votes fell and everything.
Yeah, Breckinridge was a Kentuckian, he was from Kentucky. There's actually quite a few John Breckinridges in Wikipedia, so I wasn't sure about that. Yeah, that's interesting William Seward, of course, was later the Secretary of State, and of course he was very most famous, really known for the purchase of Alaska. yeah, I didn't realize that. Was there a large red team in Virginia? That's certainly
Well, I
something I
mean,
didn't realize.
I don't know what the overall base for Virginia was. I'd have to look that up. I just remember looking at it because I was surprised with the way things fell. Again, always surprised when that's the great thing about history. When you start really digging into it, you start peeling that onion away. What you find is just amazing sometimes. I'm like, so the Republican delegation from Virginia was one of the reasons Lincoln made it to the White House in the first place, because that's how he got the nomination. He wasn't expected to receive a single vote from Virginia. And I read somewhere, and this has been years ago, but it was really shocking for him to pull that many Virginia delegates. But he did pull 2/3 of the delegates unexpectedly.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder too, and what do you think might have happened if Seward had gotten the nomination?
I never gave that one much thought. I was more thinking about the way things played out with it.
Seward,
I'd have to look at the total delegate counts to decide how many Lincoln actually needed. I mean, if Seward had gotten the nomination, who knows how it would all. I mean, that's kind of a wild one that can go a lot of trails. I don't know that I don't know Seward well enough because I haven't studied him. I do think Lincoln's belief in how federal government and the union should work definitely led us down the path into the Civil War.
Yeah.
I fully believe that. And that goes back to our two convention discussion with it. Again, you got Virginia. Virginia at first says we're not going to secede. 2/3 vote against it.
Yeah.
Virginia's sitting there. They've got the convention lined up with it. And then Fort Sumter in California breaks out. And then what happens is, I mean, you already know this, Lincoln in his office sends a message to the governor of Virginia that he's going to need to conscript 75,000 people from his militias, from his military, from his civilians to fight on behalf of the Union to put down this uprising. And the letter he sent them, the State Department in the letter too, we only need them for 90 days. Lincoln's going into this thinking he's going to pull from Virginia, which surprises me, because he had reports back that if you actually attack the South, Virginia won't be with you. But it was his order to Virginia to provide 75,000 people to go fight the southern states that led to the second convention actually voting to succeed. Yes. And I always wonder, because if Lincoln had left that alone, if they sent in between that decision, a couple of things happened, but one of which is they sent a small delegation to Lincoln to plead not to do this, and that got turned down.
And this was after Fort Sumter,
right after.
Yeah, and of course, granted, we were going by horseback, but the trip from Richmond to Washington D.C. is still probably what, 1 day or 2 days on a horse.
I would think one day if you're pushing it. Yeah, I mean, right now for me to get down 29 and to get down to Lynchburg, it's still going to take me 4 hours.
You have a car,
with a car.
You have a car though. Yeah, so, I'm just thinking there has to be, obviously there had to, and that, it's not that, we're trying to, because this is an era where we had no telephones, no radios,
right? Well, I think the delegation, I think the actual articles of succession for Virginia kind of laid it out a little bit better with it too. Because, one of the things I actually, because of, as a kid, you come up, you go through high school in America, and you're thinking, okay, they're all fighting over slavery. That's what I was always under the impression of coming out of school, that the whole war was about slavery. And then you start looking into it, and you start, especially as you move into the libertarian areas, you start hearing it was about states' rights. And then you read the articles of succession, you get to that point where, let me look this really up. And then you realize it was about slavery. I'll say that right off the bat. If you read the articles of succession of all the states, it is about the institution of slavery being under attack. And it is written into the succession articles, except Virginia. Virginia, when they did theirs, they were talking about the federal government using its powers to injure the people of Virginia. They're referring to this conscription to pull our people and put them into this fight, and the federal government's abuse of powers of the southern slave holding states. It's the only one that doesn't mention it as a defense of it, as a defense. And I think the wording of that, I mean, you could probably look it up. I think that of the southern slave holding states spoke to where Virginia was on this. And, you look at who Virginia had, and I guess the main thing I look at, had Virginia not been forced, had they say, well, remain neutral. I mean, Maryland's occupied at this point. Maryland's just a neutral state that's occupied by the federal government. If Virginia had not been forced to this point, I don't know that they would have gone with the South. And I actually think the request for 90 days was probably accurate. You take Virginia out of that war, there is no war.
Yeah.
And I believe this, if we
There's
look
no,
at
there's
Lee,
no
we
Lee
look
and there's
at
no Jackson,
well, most of Virginia's leadership would have voluntarily fought with the Union. I think, if you really research these guys, these are military guys.
Yeah.
It wasn't a matter of those guys going to war. They're already in the military. If they want to go fight for the Union, they can. You just said it. Lee himself put that down. They were behind the government at that point, but this order of conscription is what I feel like pushed it, and that's what gave the South, Virginia, its military. And Virginia's military was extremely decisive in that war, lasting as long as it did.
Yes.
And its leadership more so. Now, somebody pointed out to me recently, well, maybe the leadership was good, but maybe McClellan was just that bad. You know what? There's a truth to that. So I can understand that argument. It works. But, and this is all coming back around because I know I give long answers, but I'm circling back around to the slavery aspect of it, talking about Virginia as a slaveholding state and where it truly was. A lot of the northern Virginias were already past, most of Virginia, 2/3 of it was already past the concept that one day slavery will end. And you look at Lee, as much as he gets attacked, and I'm not defending the Confederacy, I'm not defending slave owners, but you look at how harsh Lee has been attacked over the years, yet Lee didn't even own slaves. Now, when I say that, people jump up immediately. Lee received slaves as part of a dowry from his wife's father when he got married. And Lee released those slaves during the Civil War in the beginning, before the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah.
So I think, Virginia gets painted in a wrong light. Did they choose the wrong side? Most absolutely. But was the merits of that decision wrong? I don't believe in Virginia it was about protecting this institution. The majority of Virginians, when you look at history, when I look at history, they were already against it. They felt that it needed to, and they just didn't feel like there was a push to end it in Virginia.
It's one, like I said, it's one of those questions when you have this awful system and you're born into it, how do you get rid of it? It's a very complicated question, and I can also remember, Jackson taught a slave to read, and it was illegal to do that. Stonewall Jackson, Thomas J. Jackson, who was also from the old state of Virginia. I mean, I want to go over this though. South Carolina, December 20th. These are the succession dates. Mississippi, 9 January. Florida, 10th. Florida the 10th. Alabama the 11th. Georgia the 19th. Louisiana the 26th. So Texas, February 1st, but it also looks like, I guess maybe Texas had, and then they had a referendum on the 23rd of February. So by then we have 7 states out. Lincoln is inaugurated on the 4th of March, and then Fort Sumter happens on April 12th, and Lincoln issues this call up at, on the 15th of April. Geez, on the 15th of April. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. I never made that connection. That's a very good point.
And, and then on the 17th, it looks like Virginia, I guess maybe the legislature said on the 17th, and then there's a referendum on May 23rd. And then Arkansas on the 6th of May, Tennessee, and then North Carolina. So obviously, there was obviously still really kind of a geographic component here, though. If arguably, the Confederacy, was initially, Arkansas was north, Tennessee was still in the north, and Virginia, North Carolina were still in the north. But it just trekked further north, and it is questionable, and if this does, how would it have resolved itself? Because I don't know, get in the heads of all these other states, but yes, they didn't want to be part of a union that was going to be maintained by force, is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, but the article, again, I know the dates fall in, and I mean, they mention it in their articles of succession, all the other states. They specifically mention the institution of slavery and the federal government's overreach in different words and different languages. So it was heavily about slavery that they chose their sides. I mean, North Carolina, I always wondered about that late jumping in, so to speak. I really think with North Carolina, sometimes I have wondered, even though theirs also mentions it, if North Carolina, by the point they decided, what are you going to do if you're North Carolina? Virginia's gone, and everybody else around you gone. So there is that aspect of it, but I would have preferred, for me to think that, I would have had to seen something different written.
Yeah, definitely. The geography of North Carolina, there wasn't really much of anything they could do at that point, because they were the 11th in the, because all the other states around them were already out of the union. It was,
well, that's what I'm getting back to. I just think, maybe if Virginia didn't go, maybe if Lincoln wasn't so set on having this war and establishing the federal dominance, and that's going towards what you were just saying. I do believe Lincoln was set in the mindset that we need to establish the national government, the federal government. We need to establish the dominance of the government. So I personally feel like there were so many different ways he could have gone. And instead, he chose this route, which eventually forced Virginia into the South, in my opinion. And as a leader, that's the difference between that 90-day war he's talking about and what really happened with the number of casualties and deaths when you think about it. I mean, the destruction for the Civil War is just amazing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I believe also, Major Anderson at Fort Sumter was also a slave owner, even though he stuck with the Union. Grant was a slave owner. It really wasn't as black and white as people want to believe that it was.
Well, and that's it. I mean, you look at Grant. I mean, he didn't release his slaves until after the war was well over. We aren't out there tearing down Grant statues, not saying that we should start doing that or whatever. But I think we have to look. We've lost the ability to look at historical history from a historical context and a presence of what it was at that time. I mean, if the caveman beats up the neighbor in the other cave for a piece of food, is he horrible? No. I mean, it's just that was that time and place. And like you said, these individuals were stuck in a time and place. Go back to Lee. And I'm not trying to be an overall Lee defender. I just remember more about him because his story, when you read his wife's diaries and stuff, his story is actually written. Like when you talk about Lee, you say some of this information. Unlike other ones where they have different variations, Lee's stuff it's documented. But you got this guy who he built a church and then taught Sunday school to the slave community in his town once he had his own slaves after his wife that he felt they needed that. He actually taught Sunday school at the church for the slaves and the African Americans in town. This is not a guy who is out to dominate people by any means or stretch. And I do think, he didn't come from the same types of backgrounds as a lot of the wealthy there. So you got a guy who saw himself as a soldier, as an officer and a gentleman, all the way through from beginning to end with it.
Yeah, it's really it's very interesting how all this worked out, And of course, after Virginia's out, where's the fights, Yeah, you said, North Carolina, looking back at all this with Virginia, I don't know how, well, Tennessee and Arkansas pretty much had a choice. Yeah, but And then, of course, it was soon after that then, of course, the 1861 Wheeling, and then, of course, also in May is the Wheeling Conventions.
Yeah.
The Wheeling, yes, I know all about it because I grew up 10 miles from Wheeling.
That's your side, yeah.
Yeah, I know all about the Wheeling Conventions. Yeah, we have Independence Hall there, still that same beautiful building that's become a landmark. And these rogue counties in North and West Virginia decide, oh, we don't want to be part of Virginia anymore. So it's
it's funny you say that because spring break, I was up in a place called New Vrindavan. My wife is from
New Vrindavan. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So my wife is from Nepal, and this is one of the few places where we can go with all the kids where they hear everything in English, because even though our children are baptized Catholic, we go to family events and temples, and they have no clue what's going on. We discovered that place probably about 7 years ago, maybe 8. And there they can at least understand what the practices are so they don't feel completely isolated if we go to a wedding on that side of the family or funeral or an event. But I saw what you were just talking about during that spring break because we went over to Wheeling. And I actually saw that. We didn't go inside, but I'm like, okay, this one's on the trip for the next trip up, because we've been moving out further and further from New Vrindavan with the kids getting older because they get bored during the course of 5 days up there, It's a beautiful country. Beautiful country.
Yeah, it's
I was actually studying Wetzel when I was
Louis Wetzel. Yeah.
So Louis Wetzel, they moved his body and reinterred him right there, literally in New Vrindavan. They have the family cemetery.
He's buried near there. Yes, Louis Wetzel.
You can walk to it from the temple.
It's Louis Wetzel was a lesser, basically for people out there, basically a lesser known version of Daniel Boone, but really,
right. It's a fascinating story.
But around there, he's a legend. I mean, they named a county after him. It's Wetzel County. So and of course he's buried in Marshall County, which is named for John Marshall. And of course, Wheeling is in Ohio County, which was actually Ohio County before the state of Ohio existed. So, yes, and it does border. It also does border the state of Ohio. So yes,
that's what always shows my wife. If we go out, we go up Maryland through 70 and then cut across the panhandle of Maryland to it. Yeah. So it's like you're going through Maryland, then you're going through Virginia, then you're in West Virginia, then you're back in Pennsylvania.
The boundary. Yeah, it's kind of weird how it works out. Yeah. Especially like with Route 50, it goes from Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia again, Virginia, then goes into DC, then back into Maryland. So it's
all the way to Ocean City.
Yeah, all the way. Yeah. So that's how. Yeah, all that. It all seems like it's all pretty small together, and there was some talk, bringing in some of the other northern counties. I think they tried to get some of the, I don't know how they finally settled on the boundary between West Virginia and Virginia where they did, but it is where it is right now. So
from being up there, I kind of figured it was, can we really go over that mountain if we want to? That's kind of how I feel.
But it's interesting, here that Virginians were basically kind of accepted that slavery wasn't going to last. I don't think they did. Maybe felt that way in the further south, but
you do find that when you're reading about several of these generals and the people at the time, and at least, like you said, from Charlottesville up is pretty much where Charlottesville up and back is where it starts changing. That's where the mentality is different. And of course, Northern Virginia has already moved forward at that point with it. And when you look at those votes again for secession, it's actually a lot of Northern Virginia delegates who are voting against it, along with the people on the western side. I think it was the Northern Virginia votes against it that kind of surprised me even more, because I didn't really expect that myself when I looked into it.
Yeah. One thing I've always wondered, I'm kind of surprised the far southwest stayed with Virginia, just because that's a very mountainous area. In fact,
it's the same thing.
That's the highest parts of the state. In fact, I mean,
yeah. But I don't know. Again, you said it earlier. There's no communication.
Yeah.
So if you ride down to town, there's a war going on. Okay, we need you to be part of it. Okay, what did they know in Southwest Virginia until everything was already done at that point? it's still very rural out there.
Oh yeah, it's still no.
I remember before GPS, and even when GPS was first coming, being down in southwestern Virginia, and I mean, it's dark at 3:00 up in those mountains on those little roads. It is wilderness.
That way, you're down there near Bland, or Withville or Bristol, and that area.
Well, obviously, I've always said it wrong because I always called it Whiteville, but yeah, you're exactly right. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That area.
Yeah. And Virginia, but once the Civil War started, though, there was no coming back.
Right. Especially for rural households, you're stuck in the middle of it either way it goes.
And how soon, how soon do people even learn of these battles, before they happen?
Well, that's what I was thinking when you brought up southwestern Virginia. They may, it might have been 6 months into it before they even realized some people a war was going on.
Yeah.
I mean, it is even now it's sparsely populated down there.
Yeah.
You get down the border at Danville, and there's nothing once you get outside these little towns.
And I don't think there was any fighting over there, was there?
Yeah, I don't recollect much because everything really centered on, after, of course, Manassas and the Maryland, Pennsylvania side, all that. Everything else is Shenandoah down to Fredericksburg until they finally penetrated through Fredericksburg and made their way down to Richmond with it. But most of the battles were right up that line from Fredericksburg out to Front Royal and the Shenandoah and then northward when you look at this particular area. You don't really see a lot of southern battles in Virginia south of Richmond.
Yeah, Bull Run happened in July, so that was the first major battle.
The first Bull Run, yeah.
The first Bull Run, and the South won that with Lee, and I think Jackson might have been there too. So, and I think that was finally the realization for the North, for Lincoln, probably, this could go on longer than we think it will go on,
Well, I don't know that he believed that. I don't know that they believed that so much as it was just the fact that they underestimated.
Yeah.
Where I'm at now with Falls Church, there's actually a quarter mile from here. There's an old fort on a hill there at a place called Seven Corners. Another fascinating thing in history. They actually brought out the balloons to run them up so they could watch the battle from the balloons. So technically, the concept of an Air Force and aerial observation began in Falls Church with these balloons. But they came over like they were going to have a picnic, watch a battle like old time, watch them march to each other, and then come home. I don't think they expect the ferocity of it,
That's really interesting, though. So this might have been the first war where air was actually used, although it was balloons. But you have.
I don't know about Europe. I haven't looked into things. I never thought about that.
Yeah, but you didn't have airplanes. But balloons would be useful in at least seeing what's going on, and having an overview of using them kind of. Although there is the problem also of communication, though. If you get this if you see all this stuff in the balloon, how do you tell people down on the ground, hey, this happens, because you have no radios.
Well, they had it tethered up, so I'm sure they could drop notes and stuff, but how you get it back up to say, look,
this?
You got a good point. You got a good point with it. That part just fascinated me one day because I'm like, so basically the Air Force was born right here in Northern Virginia. The first time it was deployed and used by the Union with it.
And it's also interesting looking at the battle. The next battle was in Missouri at Wilson's Creek. And, I've actually heard that the state with the second most Civil War battles was actually Missouri.
Missouri. Yeah.
Which might surprise people, but it's and Missouri never succeeded, but like Kentucky, they had split governments.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there were other rump governments formed just to be part of the South, but they never got off the ground, of course. So and of course.
Well, you look at the Mississippi River and you look at all the battles up and down the Mississippi River. That makes a lot of sense. So
yeah, well, I think a lot of the Confederacy also thought or hoped that maybe taking over the Mississippi might force the states that were dependent on the Mississippi to leave the Union as well.
That's probably. I mean, I never gave that side of it a lot of thought.
Yeah,
I was just always like you, surprised at how serious the battles were on the Mississippi, especially get further down on it, because it does seem to be out in the backfield of the whole war, but that's where a lot of the fighting happened.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've been to Vicksburg. I mean, it's a lot like visiting Gettysburg. You see all these sites, and certainly there's a lot of history there. I was driving back and I thought, I'll just stop and see what's here. And, you can drive around
Right.
2 hours. It was kind of a rainy, cloudy day, unfortunately, but and it looks like, it just looks like an old southern city, but Vicksburg. And that was one thing Lincoln did immediately, though, is he tried to go back. Yeah, well, we better take back New Orleans, to make sure we can control. I mean,
well, and that's what it was all about. The supplies.
Yeah, having
both sides.
Well, we didn't have the railroads weren't. Well, the railroads were getting developed, but still, the river was an important development in the. And
but with Vicksburg North, there was a lot of fighting over the railroad lines, protecting and destroying them. That was a huge thing going on down there.
Yeah, and of course, it was largely through West Virginia and Virginia also that the first railroad to the Ohio River was built, which went through my hometown at one point. It was, and tragically, it's no longer there. But that was the Baltimore and Ohio, and they also had the Chesapeake in Ohio, and that was the whole goal, was to connect those two things and get through those big mountains. All done with private money. It was amazing. Yeah. So.
Oh, when you think about it, especially with the canal all the way up to Pittsburgh at that time.
Yeah. You had the canals. I mean, and and the Potomac had a canal on it too. You'd have the towpaths so you'd put these boats and horses would be pulling these loads on the rivers. It wasn't really of course, how big were the rivers back then before the area of dams too? You didn't.
True.
Yeah.
I've looked at the ones over in Georgetown and looked at them up through Western Maryland at different spots. Again, like you're driving, you're going somewhere, and let me see this. And I was because these are the mule-drawn locks and everything made out of wood. It just fascinates me, the engineering of it at that time and place.
Yeah, and having been to Harper's Ferry, it's a lovely visit there, but the rivers are not very impressive there. I mean, you could almost put on a pair of boots and
wade across.
Really walk across the rivers. Neither one of them's really. I don't even call those rivers. Growing up on the Ohio, the Ohio is a river. Those aren't rivers. Those are creeks.
Harper's Ferry is like the rafting, wild, wonderful capital for all the tourists from my.
You do have some white watering. You do have some white watering in the Eastern Panhandle, West Virginia, a little higher up.
No, that's more of that easier water. That's why there's so many things to do out there.
Well, you need to have more rapids, and usually white watering is in areas where you have more drops.
Yeah.
Because that speeds the water up. But the Potomac splits, and there's the North Branch Potomac, which forms the boundary between West Virginia and Maryland. And then Maryland ends actually, I should say Maryland begins where the Potomac begins. But then there's also the South Branch Potomac, which goes down south and goes into Pendleton County and almost into Highland County, Virginia. Because it's that area where the boundary kind of goes, because part of the boundary there between West Virginia and Virginia is also the Eastern Continental Divide.
Right.
Yeah. And that boundary also extends between some of the counties in West Virginia, and Pendleton is all on the east side. Grant and Hardy County are on the east side, but Tucker County and Randolph County are on the west side. And then that curves around, and but then the Continental Divide goes through, the Eastern Continental Divide goes through Garrett County, Maryland. And most of Garrett County is on the east side, but some of it's on the west side. So because those lines are definitely not straight, they're all curved over.
Not up there. That's what we were talking about, driving through it.
Yeah, and it splits down. There's a little bit of headwaters for the James River in Monroe County, West Virginia, but that's the only other part where there's anything in West Virginia on the Eastern Continental Divide. So, So who else did Virginia ever try to? But by then, once you're in the war, you really can't stop the war until it's over, right? I mean. Yeah. I mean, the Bull Run happens and all this other stuff, was there any plan to free the slaves before the war was over in Virginia or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of. This was more of when you look back and read some of the diaries and texts, it's been a while. It was just a prevalent feeling that it needed to go away, especially again, Northern Virginia and the Western side. The Western side didn't care. Like you said, they weren't really wasn't slave owning population. The northern side, like most of the north part of the U.S., had already kind of moved into manufacturing and was moving away from it. But I mean, would slavery have gone away on its own without the war? I mean, maybe by the time we got to the 1900s, it wasn't going to go away as long as you let the plantations down there. They weren't going to give it up.
Yeah, they weren't going to give it up. But it was also harming them because they weren't getting the new immigrants. All the new immigrants are going north. Right. And that was creating all this population growth up north that didn't go down south. Immigrants came to New York City, they came to Boston, but they didn't come in at Charleston.
No, they came to work.
Yeah,
the work was taken in the South with slavery down there.
But you had such a boon in immigrants, especially from the 1830s, the 1840s, and 50s, especially with the Irish potato famine and all that stuff. I mean, and it was a lot of the Irishmen who, of course, were out protesting the draft because the war wasn't that popular in the North either. I mean, a lot of the people were saying, why are we doing this?
No, that's correct. That's correct. That's what I mean about Maryland being occupied.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And no real movement in Delaware either, was there?
I'm not familiar with Delaware's place in the war at all, to be honest with you. I do know
Delaware was actually a slave state, though, right? I mean, though it was so small, maybe it just wasn't. Nobody really paid much attention to them because only 3 counties.
Well, and you got to think Maryland was obviously a slave state. Southern Maryland and the Eastern Shore, these are plantations. Southern Maryland was all tobacco back in that day and age with it. I grew up on a tobacco farm. My grandfather was adopted to work on a tobacco farm. I mean, literally. Actually, one thing that might have benefited us was the need for labor as a family.
Well, Delaware geographically wouldn't have had much choice anyway. I mean,
Well, we know they had fear of losing Maryland, which would hurt DC with it, because Maryland was basically, you had the riots in Baltimore. And I don't dig too much into that side of it. But when you look at it, they did occupy Maryland. And, there was one place I found out in Front Royal, Virginia, where they had a graveyard where they had a battle and they had the markers. And I really pictured my mind because it fascinated me when I saw it. You had Maryland regiments from the Union fighting Maryland regiments from the South, from the Confederacy. So these must have been Marylanders who joined the Confederacy and went south, obviously. And I was sitting there thinking, what? It's going to sound horrible. As an officer, what a great way to clear your ranks. Let the Marylanders charge the Marylanders first and clear them out. Then we'll go into battle. But I mean, you got to think this is the type of war it was, where you literally did probably have brothers and cousins fighting on different sides.
Oh, yes.
I know as of maybe, I'm doing the last time I was down there. I haven't looked it up recently, but I know down at Point Lookout, Maryland, which is actually down where the Potomac and the Bay comes together, getting to that area. The Confederate flag was still flying there at the Confederate prison for prisoners of wars that the Union held down there. And that's where they took all the prisoners up here too, kind of put them as far away in a swamp where they can't get away. And a lot of them died. It's horrible stories when you read it. But, that's the nature of war. But they still were flying. Surprisingly, they were still flying the Confederate flag down there, but they still fly it down there they were. That might have changed now. But 6 years ago, we were down there with the kids. It was still up. And they fly it, out of respect for the number of Confederate prisoners of wars who died there.
Well, I think maybe 1/4 of the deaths in the Civil War were due to diseases or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it was so, we just didn't have penicillin. We didn't have the cleanliness now, that we have now. It's really improved so much, and we kind of take it for granted. It's
that's going to be the veteran in me. You're absolutely right, because our losses seem so minimal now. Everything's still occurring, but you don't die. It's not like it was. If you were shot in the Civil War, you were probably, if the bullet didn't kill you, it could nick your finger. It'd probably still kill you at some point from the infection that will come from it. Because the greatest invention for the U.S. military, and actually the British in the Falklands, was being able to carry IVs. At least even when I was in an airborne unit, you got an IV with you. You're taught how to stick yourself. So if your buddy goes down, you're going to stick him with the IV, prop the head, put his put his coat over top of him and move on. And that's what keeps people alive nowadays is we avoid the shock. And the treatment reaction time is so fast. And I think, sadly, that makes it easier for the general public to be more on a war footing. Their perception of war has changed. And most people, unless they've been there, have no perception of what's happening to the other side in these wars. They haven't seen the devastation and what's going on in the ground with it.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at war 100 some years ago, you're shot, you're dying. It doesn't matter where it hits you. There's a good chance you're going to die or you're going to lose a leg or an arm just from the infection.
I like to ask these what ifs. What happens if Jackson doesn't get killed? Stonewall, Thomas J. Jackson, yes.
I don't think I think it could have lasted a little longer. And this is, what is it called too? I've toured that whole field down there. The Wilderness.
Jackson's Mill.
Battle of the Wilderness is what, that's where they marched the kids in from the military academy out in the Shenandoah as a reserve flanking force. When you look at the whole Fredericksburg over to the Wilderness battle lines, it's intense. If you look at it from a military, the back and forth, the strategy that both sides used. But I don't know that losing Jackson, other than having an effect on that particular battle, changes what happens long term. Jackson was a great leader, but I don't know he could have turned a war. The other flip side is going back to, McClellan. McClellan for the Union side was a complete disaster. What if they'd had a strong, honestly, going back to the Virginia thing, if you got Lee and Jackson on the federal government side, which is where Virginia had left,
yes,
the regular army would have gone Union. It was the drafting of people that really kicked Virginia in. But you probably do have a 12-week war at tops with all that working for you versus against you. That's what turned it into the bloodbath. And that's, again, where I think there was probably options to avoid the bloodbath at points. And I still feel like from Lincoln and, looking at how things were decided along the way, this dominance was meant to be established of the federal government being superior.
Yeah, I do wonder about that too. If that was what Lincoln's plan was, there seemed.
I believe absolutely that's where he's going with it. Yeah, but then again, I said I grew up in Southern Maryland. I grew up 15 minutes away from Dr. Mudd's house. I grew up 20 minutes south of Surrattsville. So
Dr. Mudd. Dr. Mudd, who's that?
John Wilkes Booth. He's the guy that set his leg.
Oh, yes.
After the shooting, they actually came, probably within.
and Dr. Mudd didn't know what had happened. So
that's a horrible story what they did to him.
Yeah,
but that is a horrible story. Same with Mary Surratt.
Yeah, he was a doctor and saw a guy who had a broken leg. So I said, I need to help this guy, and Dr. Mudd had no idea because how does the word get out back then?
It doesn't.
Today the president somebody gets shot, everybody in the world knows it within an hour, but now, back in those days, Dr. Mudd, that's an awful story.
Yeah. So you do have to kind of wonder, and then you look at that whole one too. Because you think of Lincoln getting shot randomly by some crazy assassin at a movie theater, when the reality is there was pretty much attempts on all the senior leadership at the same time. His Secretary of State, this was a well-timed, coordinated effort. It wasn't just Lincoln, but had that not happened, where are we at with this country today? Does the federal government get stronger and stronger than what it did at that point? Or did that kind of reverse it a little bit? You never know with these what ifs, but sometimes it is fascinating to think about them.
Yeah, I don't know what happens either if Lincoln would have, because then afterwards there was this attitude of let's get revenge on the South, and it really created a lot of animosity there. And I don't know if that really was what happened. Yeah,
Well, it's like, to me, seeing Fort Bragg renamed hurt, but you look at that and you think about how they did it. It was very effectively done. That's why our major bases are in the South. That's why you have Fort Benning, Fort Bragg, Fort Knox. And the reason for this was to have your military permanently deployed in the South. And the reason for the names was to help make the locals kind of be like, oh, they're naming it after my general. It wasn't, it wasn't meant like the local people decided, I want a base in Georgia named, what I mean? It was actually well thought out when you really start and think about it.
Well, there was also, but when Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, before it was all over, I think Grant ordered his soldiers and said to him, he said, salute all the, and told all the other soldiers to salute the other soldiers, because he said, he was basically saying, we're not on different armies anymore. The war's over. He's saying these are Americans, it's.
Well, and people like to make bad things out of it. But the reality is, a soldier's a soldier, whether they're Americans or if they're uniformed soldiers. Soldier's a soldier, whatever country they're from, number one.
Yeah.
I always respect it. Even taking POWs, I always respected the enemy, the uniformed enemy. I just, there, but by God's grace, go I,
Yeah.
That's the old saying. It could be me on that. I could be the guy getting my mouth taped and getting tied up and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's looking at a perspective of true enemies. And when you're looking at these people having to fight the guys that they were probably in units with, went to school with, met on training exercises, how tough that must have been for them, And at the end, maintaining that professional courtesy is actually extremely impressive when you look at how the military handled it.
Yeah, well, and who gave Pickett's appointment to West Point? Lincoln.
You're right. I'd forgotten about that.
And which means he would have been from Illinois. So, so there was a guy from Illinois going to fight for the South, and of course, we haven't really covered much on Gettysburg, but obviously the most significant, probably the most important battle of the war. And really I think Lee realized that this was probably the only way to get the war over. So he went for it and he lost, but I think if Lee does win that battle, then there might very well be a negotiated peace, but I could be wrong.
No, I've always wondered that, because I do not believe they would have ever, with the manpower, won the war.
Yeah.
We forget that. We tend to look at it like the two sides were equal or something, but you're talking they had 50% of the people military-wise that the Union had. But when you look at the casualties that were inflicted on the Union, and of course, being the aggressor is difficult. That's why we have 3-1 before you even take something. If you ain't got 3 people to every one, you don't attack. But looking back into it, had he been successful there, who knows what would have happened with, say, Maryland, an occupied state.
Yeah,
that's the type of thing that technically could probably have led to some uprisings in some areas if that breakthrough had occurred. And then, there we are again, luck. They weren't looking for each other, the two militaries. Just when they initially came in contact, it was luck at that time that made it fall that way where it did and when it did.
Yeah, Maryland. I mean, maybe Maryland would have went, maybe Delaware would have went.
Well, I think that's obviously why he went there.
And of course, Pennsylvania was, Pennsylvania was also considered a battleground state in the election. And if, what happens if Douglas or even Breckinridge or Bell wins Pennsylvania instead of Lincoln, it's history.
Well, I think if you get past Gettysburg and you get back around Maryland there, I think you start seeing a lot of dominoes fall that wouldn't fall otherwise.
Yeah.
So I do think that I personally would suspect that was the goal, to get that far behind and not necessarily negotiate the peace out of it, which would be helpful, but to get states like Maryland and border areas to kind of start revolting too, to force a negotiation.
Yeah, because there was a significant anti-war movement in the North, and it's often forgotten. You know, people like they called them the Copperheads. But yeah, actually, you know, at the time, you know, Virginia had 15 electoral votes in 1860, but Pennsylvania had 27 and Ohio had 23. So we could already see a population shift at the time.
Yeah.
Virginia had the most of the Confederate states, but yeah, so, but you know, you
what was the breakdown on Virginia's electoral? While you're looking at it, if you are.
Virginia, well, they all
go Seward,
they all went to Bell.
Bell, I mean, I said Seward, Bell. So every single one went to Bell. Okay.
Yeah. The 1860 election is why I'm not a big fan of the Electoral College. I mean, Lincoln got only 39.8% of the vote, but he wins the Electoral College easily. It's
well, and there's how these things happen.
Yeah.
But again, how many candidates were there in that election?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were a total of 4. If the Southern and the Northern Democrats. One thing that's interesting too is if in many northern states, if you take Douglas's and Breckinridge's votes and put them together, in a lot of the northern states, Lincoln still has more votes.
Okay.
You know, just like to do these hypotheticals. It's only really out in the West, California and Oregon, but you know, they also would have combined their resources and they would have been campaigning. So I don't know how they would have been campaigning on the same, because Douglas got 29.5% of the popular vote, but only got 12 electoral votes. I mean, meanwhile, Breckinridge gets 18.1% of the popular vote, but gets 72 electoral votes. I mean, it's such a weird system. I don't know. Yeah, there's and for whatever reason, Buchanan had no interest in running again, or maybe they had no interest in nominating him again,
or seeing where things were going.
I think he saw where things were going. You know, that was an interesting time because we had a bunch of 1-term or less presidents then.
Right. I mean,
in fact,
to handle where that's headed at that stage. Train's out the station. It's moving.
Yeah. In fact, really, Jackson was 2, but and Van Buren is 1. And then you have Harrison and Tyler, who Harrison dies and then Tyler finishes. Tyler does. Then Polk goes for 1. Then again, you have Taylor getting in. He dies. Fillmore finishes. But then after that, Pierce. And then after that, Buchanan. So you had a bunch of single-term presidents there or less.
Well, and, you know, I'm going to jump subjects here and jump ahead. But at that time, our states, you know, the 17th Amendment hadn't been put in place. At that time, our states were still picking their senators to represent them.
Yes, exactly.
And a lot of people, that's one thing that is really hidden in school, is with the state legislatures, each house picking their own person to be the 2 senators to represent them to DC. So the senators were truly acting on behalf of local constituents of their legislature more than they were individuals. And back then it was like, even if you were nominated, you should try and turn it down because it was like one of those things where we nominate you. I don't want it. Well, you have to do it. You had to go through all that rigmarole versus fighting to get the position to do it. But what that allowed, and that's personally, I think this is one of the great destructions of the Constitution as the founders set it up. What it allowed is for states to have truly representative senators who were focused on the needs of those states. It also allowed for parties, political parties. I'm not going to throw my libertarian hat on you talking about history right now, but it allowed for parties to build up in one state or 2 states and have access to the federal platform. And the 17th Amendment coming in basically turned it into bought and sold senators. It basically was first time they had a real good point where they had straight two parties. And by eliminating that, now it's going to be the individuals are going to vote, but what's going to determine it? The cash. Yes. The cash coming into the state behind the candidates, behind the two major parties. So now the national parties are basically dictating who the two candidates are going to be, Democrat or Republican, because they have the money and the wherewithal to control that. And I think that's a huge splitting point when that was done between what was originally set up and what we currently have today. So just going back to the point of having a vote, I mean, I don't think we could imagine 4 presidential candidates today getting the kind of volume that they did, the percentages, what you just mentioned. We do have multiple candidates, but the rest of them are getting 1%, 2%. It's not realistic. But eliminating the power of the senators resting in their legislatures to decide who's going really changed the dynamics of our federal government and handed all power at that point back to the two national parties.
Yeah, and then there was, and then also another thing that's forgotten too is Douglas had to get 2/3 of the vote at the convention. That rule was abandoned under FDR, but it used to be 2/3 of the vote at the convention, which means you had some really long conventions to get that nomination. And often the nominee ended up being a compromise or somebody who wasn't even in the room.
Right. They did have to work amongst themselves.
Yeah.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. The longest
they would have dozens of votes.
Yeah, the longest convention was actually 103 ballots, and it was and that was when they nominated John W. Davis, who was from West Virginia, and the only time anybody from West Virginia has been nominated for president was John W. Davis in 1924, and proceedingly got crushed by Coolidge in the election. But yes, that was
106 ballots.
Yeah, 106. Okay, yeah, it was.
How long was the convention?
I don't know. I just it's kind of like you don't really as far as time. I don't really know.
Eventually, we got to pick somebody. The elections.
Well, it's like a baseball game. You don't know how long it was in the time on the clock. You just remember how many innings it was.
Right. I just wonder if it was like, okay, everybody, we got like 4 weeks left. Let's go with that Davis guy. Nobody hates him.
That's what happens. You end up with somebody that nobody's really that enthusiastic about. But the fact is, there's nobody who you end up with something that kind of everybody can at least. Okay, yeah, he's a good guy.
We're talking libertarians here.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, but you don't. Yeah, but the thing is, there's nobody in the party that really hates him.
Yeah,
which is
Well, I do feel like that's our Johnson, our Wells.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everybody can stomach it, so we'll go with it.
Yeah, but one good thing is we also have a rule that every time there's a vote, the person who's last drops, so it can only go to a certain number of ballots.
Yep.
Because when you're down to 2, somebody has to get a majority.
Well, I'm not going to delve into it and take us off track, but I am curious as a delegate to see what happens in May this year. I'm really kind of curious to see how it all flows out.
Yeah,
with the libertarian side.
I didn't want to get in on that much, but
and I'm not either. I'm not going to sidetrack it, sir. But you just said it's fascinating to me how that might work out. I'm waiting to see.
Yeah, it's. I do think Virginia history. Yeah, is there anything else significant regarding Virginia history? Of course, after the war, there's Reconstruction, and then of course there's that. One thing we'd like to talk about is there's that. Virginia had their. The Supreme Court ruled at one point that West Virginia had to pay part of Virginia's unpaid debt. So West Virginia was making these payments to Virginia for like 20 years and in installments to pay off this deficit that the state of Virginia had. So there's always been some resentment about that, but
that's why you go back to even more recently, back when Maryland still had gambling, and you look at the Potomac, because a lot of people don't realize a lot of those seafood restaurants and stuff on piers were built on the Potomac so they could gamble in the restaurant by walking out the pier and technically be on the Potomac back when gambling was legal in Maryland, because Maryland owns the river, which
Maryland owns the Potomac.
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure how that worked.
Yeah, to my understanding, that's what it was. Now, I don't think anything's probably changed. That's what I was always told is the reason we have those seafood restaurants on the piers down in Southern Virginia.
Yes. Okay.
Along there was because they could gamble if they went so far out in the river. Google that real quick. See if I'm right. Now I'm curious.
Well, I can tell you that the Ohio River is in Kentucky and the Ohio River is in West Virginia. Because they were states earlier.
Right.
So Ohio and Indiana and Illinois do not have jurisdiction over the river. But yeah, that would be yeah.
Now you got me wanting to look it up. I'm looking on my phone while we're talking real quick. I'm curious.
Being colonies, I naturally do wonder, and I also wonder, what's the deal with the Delaware River between Pennsylvania and New Jersey too? That's another question. Yeah.
Yeah, Maryland owns the Potomac. I was making sure it wasn't an old wives' tale growing up over there. Yeah. The whole river, not half.
The Potomac, West Virginia doesn't have the Potomac either. Yeah, so maybe there's some deal working.
Maryland's got it all the way around.
Maryland has the Potomac. Yeah, it's theirs. Yeah. So as soon as I step into the Potomac River, I'm in Maryland. So there you go. Yeah, you have these. I don't know how that. It does create some confusion though when you have these floods and stuff like that, because I know it's defined as the water line or something.
That's an interesting thing to look into, actually, now when you say that.
Yeah, but it's not.
Is it like if a tree falls? Yeah, it's a responsibility. Well, your river destroyed my land.
Well, also, what if you have a wreck on the bridge? It's a.
Well, technically, you're in Maryland.
Yeah.
Again, going back, technically, that would be Maryland State Police at that point.
Yeah.
Because it would be like, again, the gambling. Back until they made it illegal in Maryland. That is the reason. If you went, you had to go so many feet, but they'd build the pier and build a giant restaurant and put all the gambling machines in it. Yeah. And they would have to bring them. Again, I grew up hearing this. Yeah. They had to boat them over. You couldn't drive them into Virginia because it was illegal. You had to bring them over on the boat and put them in there.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about too, you've been involved with veterans groups. Doesn't it seem like the tone of veterans has changed over time?
In many ways, kind of more specific, what you're going to, and I'll definitely answer.
Well, I can remember, I can remember going to Boise State in 1988 when I was 8, and then I can remember when the first Gulf War happened, and I was prime military age, and we were wondering how that was going to happen. And I remember all these World War II vets were talking about how great it was that we were having a war. But now when I talk to veterans, there's a very negative attitude toward war.
I'm an anti-war veteran.
I mean,
you just hit it with it. I'm not anti-war.
Yeah.
And actually, I'll clarify where I believe, and this is both because you're right. I am at a veterans event every week. Yeah. If I'm not in one of my halls, I'm in an event. I don't want to say we're anti-war. We're anti-policing the world.
Yeah.
If it's a defensive war, I think everybody I know is behind it. But, so jumping back, and this is experience of most veterans, at least at the enlisted level, and there might be a slight skewer there too. I'll get to that in a moment. But, at 19 years old, once the fighting is over, I'm an infantryman put there to guard a street corner like a police cop. And hopefully not have to shoot somebody again, not have to shoot, so we put young people in these positions. And at least when I was in, we had the Cullen Powells, we had the Schwarzkopfs, whatever you think of them. These were people who were Vietnam era veterans who believed in come in, massive firepower, get in, get the job done, get out, don't try and rebuild. Yeah. And there's a cycle you can see it. There's a clear cycle in American history where you come off, I hate to say the term, a successful war, but you come off a successful war. And then suddenly it seems like within a generation, following that, leadership feels like, okay, well, we can change the world because we've got such a successful military. And they get into this nation building and development that we saw post World War II following Korea into Vietnam.
Yeah.
Then it's like, no, everybody's anti-war again because it goes bad. Then eventually you got another generation, and then we have our Panama, we have our Gulf War, we have these successful, I hate to say successful, war is never successful, it should be a last resort.
Yeah.
But you have these successful wars, and suddenly everybody's patriotic and heroic again. And suddenly you see that again, it slides back in. We get back into thinking we can go out and build nations now. We can go fix Bosnia. We can go fix Somalia. And then eventually that leads us down to a 9/11. That leads us down to Afghanistan, Iraq, and all that, trying to rebuild. I think that's the point I'm at. And I think that's the point most veterans in the younger age group are at, is we should not be out trying to build nations and build democracy throughout the world. We should be a reactionary force. So
and I
don't think we're anti-war. We're just anti-using us.
Yeah, and I think there's more of an attitude now because a lot of people now realize just that that we can't heal the sick when we're sick ourselves. I mean,
well, then you look at the World War II generation.
Yeah,
they went, and even Korea, they did their job. Although in World War II it was several years.
Yeah, well, technically speaking, the Korean War is still on.
A lot of people don't get that. Yeah, but technically, to be pushed all the way back to Incheon and be there with that little pocket and fight all the way back up and establish that armistice is a success, really, if you think about it. So those two wars technically are what would be called successful wars, and they had their time frame, they lasted, and they were over, and the guys came home. And then that's where that mentality, I believe, is war's a good thing. We're saving the world, because they were. Yeah. They were saving nations. They were doing something that was really helping people. And then you get these long, drawn-out conflicts that end in a Saigon or end in a Kabul.
Yes.
I don't see any difference between the two. Pulling out, letting people get slaughtered. That's the end phase of it. There's a reason that I think this generation is currently so anti-war with it. And I think it's correct, because our perception of war isn't we're defending ourselves, we're defending some poor country. Our perception of war is our government's sending us over because our government wants to control us.
Or as some people say, just to spend money and make defense contractors rich.
Well, I am shocked at how often we're hearing that from our politicians in both parties currently. When they get back to Ukraine, they're selling it to us. I never thought I would live.
Yeah.
I never thought I would live to see a day where we would have leadership and politicians, and I'm not putting on my politician hat, come out and say, and also, how many Russians have died without an American dying, and how great is this because we made X number of money and created X number of jobs to make the bombs to kill them? Who are we at that point as a nation?
Yeah.
It's an industry?
Yeah.
It's sickening when you think about it. And, okay, I'll give you one more thing, and I'm going to shut up because I am going too far on answers. But second war in Iraq, when they had that fire and all, when it first opened with Baghdad, I was literally almost sick when it came on in the TVs. I remember the restaurant I was working in at the time, and people suddenly start standing up, civilians, cheering, clapping on the TV because shocking on or watching Baghdad get hit. And I was just, that was a major turning point for me on my whole perception of everything, because that was the first time I really got to see the civilian reaction being here, because I was always kind of there. I don't understand. I do understand. It's like you're watching a TV, something far away. You don't understand what's happening on the ground there. You don't understand children are dying.
Yes.
You don't understand what's going on with families, and I get it. That's what makes America great. use a term anymore. That's what makes America great. The fact that you have a small percentage of our population ever witnessing the reality of it. And that's why the U.S. military is the most successful military in the world, because our populace has no clue. Our populace lives so insulated that I think it's phenomenal when you stop and really think how isolated Americans are and how how they don't ever have to realize it. It's a great thing when you think about it. I almost wish I never joined the military so I could be one of them. I would rather be on that side,
I've always said, ask myself two questions. Would I be willing to fight in this war? And would I be willing to have this war fought in my neighborhood?
Exactly.
And if your answer to either of those is no, then you probably shouldn't be supporting the war. I'm 53 years old. I have told my Polish and my Kartvelian friends that if Russia ever attacks them, what can I do? I like them. I like those countries,
And there's another thing, though. I mean, we say we're anti-war. I don't think we should. I think we should be forcing for a ceasefire and an end to this conflict in Ukraine. It should be forcing that. Not trying to encourage it.
Yeah.
Because realization is Ukraine and Russia is a civil war between two previous Soviet socialist republics. And Ukraine never made a threat to us. But if Russia was to attack Poland, I'd be the first one to say we should be defending Poland.
But a lot of those people don't consider themselves part of it. I mean,
I get that part of it, but it doesn't change our defensive strategy.
I mentioned my Kartvelian friends. That's actually what they call their country, but most Americans call it Georgia. You do not call them Russians. They do not consider themselves Russians. They never will consider themselves Russians, even though it was a Soviet republic.
I get that, but at the same time, I don't see where it changes our dynamic for us. Yeah. But you mentioned Poland too. Yeah. See, there I would say we would have to react immediately. Yeah. We got a treaty. This is changing dynamics. And I think that's the key thing is, just you look at everything going on, Iran now, Israel, all that.
Oh.
It's just we're getting involved in things we don't need to be involved in. And we should be involved as a nation. We should be leading to end these wars, not profiting off the wars is where I'm going.
Well, yeah.
Well, like you said, we're seeing it as an industry now that's going to make us money, put our people to work. That's a terrifying concept to me. We're a mercenary nation. Is that what we are?
Yeah. Well, in some cases too, it's nearly impossible to figure out who the good guy is anymore. And
yeah, that's true.
But anyway, that's where we are right now.
But I don't think we're trying. I think you hit on this. We're seeing it as an economical boom. Our politicians are telling that. Good for the economy. Create jobs.
I've heard people have told me the same thing about Russia selling weapons to both Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's like, oh, wait, we can sell to both sides. Yeah, that's a scam, Yeah, it doesn't really. Yeah, and there's so many other ways you can make money. You can produce cars, or you can figure out ways to build better mousetraps.
Well, that's like this whole. Let's move to Yemen. I know we're getting way off our subject topic here.
Yeah.
What are the Yemenis going to do to us? Okay, so I'm going to finish the statement up real quick, turn it over to you. But I doubt that our shipping industry is running ships from California to Asia, from the East Coast to Europe. I do not see that anybody's going, you know what? I'm going to send this American ship from LA through the Suez Canal, through the Mediterranean to get to Europe. It ain't going to happen. There's no financial or there's no sense in it.
Yes.
So there is no threat to U.S. shipping interest in the Suez Canal, because the only thing we should have there that threaten us is our own military. It's other nations' ships coming to sell to us. I get that. But what are we dealing with this for? There is absolutely zero reason to be egging this on.
I agree. Yeah, Well,
I'm waiting to see what they do with Haiti next. It's just like
gosh,
we see an opportunity, and we're like, okay, here's the next one.
you want to talk about America trying to fix a broken country? I mean, oh my, it's. I mean, it's really sad. I don't know what you would do for Haiti. I mean, it's
number one.
It's arguably the worst country to live in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, even the Cubans don't want to go there
without using regime change. We trigger a lot of this.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, that's a very, although, also that was another thing too, though, that, the slave uprising in Haiti was part of a lot of Southerners also feared that there might be a similar slave uprising here, and they were thankful that the northern states, thank you for protecting us and helping us, and which is why some abolitionists wanted the North to leave the Union and break it up that way, which is often forgotten because, once the Civil War started, a slave just had to go to the northern states. He didn't have to go all the way to Canada.
Yeah, which was fascinating because same time the slave in the North would be tracked. If the slave left his northern owner and tried to go to Canada, they'd bring him back from wherever. If you left out of Pennsylvania to go be free, they would yank you in New York and bring you back to Pennsylvania. You came up from North Carolina, it's like, oh, hey, you made it. Let us help you. That aspect of it with the whole proclamation and only freeing the slaves in the South is just ludicrous. And, pushing Lincoln up to this great guy isn't the truth, or he would have just freed them all at the same time. The goal there was to hurt the South. It wasn't to help people, sadly.
Having read Lincoln, there was one forgotten. Lincoln actually sent troops to intervene in the Taiping Rebellion. Why he did that, I have no idea. But that was actually,
I have no idea on that. I got to look that up.
That's something a lot of people don't know about.
Huh.
But there was actually a speech where he talked about sending troops to China to help crush the Taiping Rebellion. It's like, why was he, especially when you have a civil war? Because that's one thing I've said about one thing, if we had a civil war here, the empire's gone.
Oh yeah, it don't come back.
You can't maintain it, but
I don't think in this day and age there is any coming back as is after that. It's not going to be another civil war like it is. I'm not even sure you would end up with 2 nations and not 5 or 6, to be honest. But things are so polarized right now. But I don't like to go down that trail. Yeah. I don't foresee it happening. And I do think, again, I do think the solution is political, but it's going to depend upon American citizens waking up and paying attention. And I'm not going to go into the whole old party, uniparty, pick the right people and pick your battles when you're voting. I sat there and I watched so many people at the election grab their little, like kids, like 6th graders, go up and grab their suggested ballot, their pink one or their blue one, run inside to vote right down that ballot with it, come back out to look for their little sticker from teacher. I did my job.
Yeah.
And then I had so many people. It did surprise me because I was expecting that people were telling me to expect 2 or 3% as a libertarian, and I had this, I wanted much more. I didn't expect to win the first time out, especially as a libertarian in Northern Virginia. But I'm like, I know I'm not going to do 2 or 3%. So, I mean, I did end that election with over 20% of the vote. But
that's great.
So many people came up and said, I researched, I'm voting for you. Then went and picked up their ballot, each or other. It wasn't like one side or another. You follow what I mean? I think the people who are engaged do look and do want change. I just think third parties in general are not getting the message out. And I say third parties in general are not doing enough good of a job. Well, we're too busy fighting our own. We're too busy fighting for scraps on our own table. One of the things that I think, and I don't want to keep sidetracking your thing, I feel bad with 15 minutes left. When I ran the campaign, I found one guy I know, Lieutenant Colonel, actually, served in Vietnam. He'd run for the Green Party candidate a number of times. And I went to him and I'm like, I know you're Green Party, but run with me. We can work together.
Yeah.
And he actually said, I'll run as an independent. I'll run for county supervisor within your district. So I ended up with this guy running as county supervisor. I ended up with an independent guy for school board. And we did everything together. And I think that's why it got us all the votes we did. But we got people need the information, and I don't know how they're going to get it because the media is always going to suppress it. The parties are going to suppress it. But I think people are done with it, but it's a matter of that snap. You have an option that's real.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
More like a Sunday football game. They don't like Trump. They don't like Biden, but I want to be on the winning team. And I know it's not that team, so I'm going to vote for my team. Yeah. That's how they're treating these decisions that lead to the wars, that lead to the inflation, that lead to everything in your life. You're treating it like a team sport, like, okay, the team I want didn't make it to the playoffs, so out of these two teams, I'm now this fan on election day. That's literally like a Super Bowl, how they're doing it. We all give up on our teams, and then we pick one team for the playoffs. That's how Americans are treating politics.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been good having you on here, Dave. I think this is a good place to wrap up. Anything else you want to say before we go?
And I took you all over the board. I apologize.
It's a great. No, that's sometimes going all over the board makes it interesting. I'll see what kind of things I can pull out of this. Well, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out my Substack, go buy my novel Escape from the Village. Where are you on the web, Dave? Any place we can find you, or are you really just on Twitter?
No. Google Dave Crance.
Dave Crance, yes, okay.
Just Google Dave Crance. You'll find me on Twitter. You'll find me on Facebook. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Everything's me.
Yeah, okay.
I am out there. So,
okay, well, thank you very much, Dave.
But I'm not selling anything. But real quick, go back. Tell me your book.
Escape from the Village.
Escape from the Village.
Yes, I'm talking too fast. Yes, I
am going to get that book.
I am Chris Baker, and we're out. Yeah.